Welcome to this event. We're going to talk about maximising efficiency in swine production. My name is Vincent ter Beek. I am editor for the magazine Pig Progress. We are based in the Netherlands, but we're reporting globally. Chris Ians received an undergraduate and a graduate degrees from Iowa State University. He's a ruminant nutritionist and came to DuPont Pioneer in 1999. He's currently leading the Grain and Nutritional Sciences Group within DuPont Pioneer Crop Science and Genetics Research and Development, which is responsibility for livestock trials, forage additive testing, high throughput grain and forage NIR analysis, as well as NIR model development. His presentation is titled Fast and Reliable Prediction of Corn and Energy, Value for Swine Diet.
Welcome to DuPont Pioneer in our Innovation Center. Today I'm going to discuss a prediction model on an NIR technology that we developed here at Pioneer a number of years ago now. And I'm going to start off by describing our group, because one of the first questions we get is, why did you do this at Pioneer? I'll tell you about the NIR technology itself, and then what we did to develop this prediction model. I do recognize some familiar faces, and some of these folks out here probably know it as well as I do, but I know that it's going to be new for a number of you as well. So just to describe briefly why we would want to do this at Pioneer, back in 1952, Henry Wallace developed a set of guiding principles for Pioneer, and we still live by these today. And not to belabor how great we deal with folks, but we wanted to make sure that we're developing the best products possible, that we deal honestly and fairly with our business partners, advertise and sell our products vigorously but without misrepresentation, and then the last one is the part I like the best and has the most benefit to this talk, is provide management suggestions that help customers derive the greatest possible value. So that's why our group exists at Pioneer, is to help understand value in that bag of seed that we sell a grower, or even to, like yourselves, to an end user that's going to use the grain from these growers. This happens to be, a number of these slides are taken out of the presentations. This happens to be one out of just a corporate slide deck that really stresses services. So Pioneer, we like to think that we differentiate ourselves from the competitors by service. And there's a number of different services we provide, but the animal nutrition and end user support piece are probably the reason why my group exists and why you're interested in a technology developed by Pioneers. So we do a lot to characterize our germplasm, trying to understand the differences between different corn genetics and different crops that we sell seed for. And we want to make sure we pass that information on to end users. So at Grain and Nutritional Sciences, we're a group of about 20 people, full-time employees. We have two locations. One is just north of here, about 30 miles, and we call it our Livestock Nutrition Center. We perform performance and digestibility trials there, cattle, sheep, pigs, and we also work with a number of universities and contract research organizations. We have a feed mill, so we produce all the diets right there at our facility. And then we have a laboratory in an adjacent community here, Urbandale, where we can do high throughput sample analysis using the NIR technology I'm going to describe today. We also do some reference or wet chemistry over there. Well, we'll discuss that as we go along here. So, developing NIR models to support research and sales activities is one of our key things, and what I'll talk about today. We use this technology internally, as well as provide it to our external partners. And that's what Danisco does with a service offering that I'll mention at the end here. So near-infrared spectroscopy. Many of you may be familiar with this. There is a picture here of a FOSS Infratech 1241 whole grain analyzer. We actually have one back here in the back that we can demo to you later. But this is a very popular instrument, and it just so happens our shop here at Pioneer is very FOSS oriented, so that's the one I'm going to discuss. We're talking about the near infrared range of light, which is just outside of the visible spectrum. You'll see here that the NIR range is 2,500 to 800 nanometers, and we actually use even a narrower band than that. So we're not even using the entire near infrared range. But this near IR range is what all of this is built on. So we have a reflectance and a transmittance spectroscopy. The FOSS whole grain analyzer is a transmittance spectrometer. Many of you from a lab background may be familiar with the FOSS 6500, which is a ground material presented to the spectrometer. And what happens with the reflectance spectrometer is that there is finely ground material packed tightly in a cup, and that cup is presented to the spectrometer. It spins around for 45 seconds to a minute. Multiple scans are taken, and the detector then reads the reflected light, the near infrared light that's reflected off this light source. That's the main difference between reflectance and transmittance, is the detector and reflectance is on the same side as the light source. For transmittance mode spectroscopy, the detector is on the opposite side of the sample from the light source. So it's looking at the near infrared light that passes through the sample. This would be whole grain, loosely packed. And what you get out of that would be a picture like this, where these white lines are the independent predictions. So whether it's reflectance or transmittance, it's taking subsamples and scanning all these subsamples, or taking multiple scans. Then we would average it. That yellow line would represent a average that's predicted off of. In the case of this instrument, we have it set up to 10 subsamples of 1.5 pounds of grain. You can change that, varying based on what you're wanting to measure, but somewhere between 5 and 10 subsample scans is what's usually set at. So it would take the subsample scans, average it, and then predict from that. And as you see on the x-axis, we use a band from 850 to 1,050 nanometers, so a very narrow band. So the advantages of NIR, it's rapid. No matter what method you use, it's very rapid. It can be non-destructive. Of course, I just mentioned in the reflectance piece that you have to grind the sample, so in that case it's not. But in the whole grain analysis, it's non-destructive, so you get the sample back. Multi-components come out in the analysis, so you can have up to, well, I don't know what you could go up to, certainly 10 traits at one time. We have the instrument back here that will give us 2 different energy values, protein, moisture, you get oil, starch, a number of things come out as a result of that 1 minute's worth of scanning. Requires little or no preparation, and whole grain, it needs to be somewhat clean based on the model. We do build in correction factors for BCFM and moisture, but if it gets too high in moisture or too much foreign material, you'll need to dry or clean the sample up a little bit. But for the most part, very little preparation. For the reflectance spectroscopy, of course, you need to grind and prep the sample a little bit. And then it's accurate and reproducible. Now the limitations of NIR, and this first one I have highlighted, bolded, enlarged, everything I can do, because this is the biggest message you have to, I guess, understand, is that it is no better than the underlying reference method. So this is a secondary technique. We've trained that instrument to predict something based on, in this case, an animal digestibility trial. It can't be any better than the underlying animal digestibility trial. It's not very good for trace analytical. As I mentioned, we use a limited spectral range. They're complex chemometric routines. The mathematics is difficult, but they give you tools to aid in that. But it really does take somebody that's very knowledgeable in creating these models, because it is not a trivial exercise. It's difficult to build good, reliable models. Now the reference chemistry, or that background method that we're training this instrument to see, provides that true value for this model development and validation. So in our case, if we're doing a swine digestible energy trial, that's the reference method. There's always ongoing model validation. You'll find things that are new to the spectrometer. Trained eyes can see that, well, this is not something that it's seen before and we need to go and do reference chemistry with it, or a reference method. And then of course it can be highly variable based on that reference method. So analytical equipment usually is fairly tight, very little error, but when you involve animals, you're going to get error. And so therein lies the difficulty in building these reliable prediction models. So steps to building this calibration: we scan all the samples that we can come up with that represent the population. So in our case, corn grain in North America was the target. We wanted to understand the difference between our genetics. So we would go out and collect 80 to 100 samples minimum that we thought spanned a range of geographies that they were grown, a range in the analytical piece that we're measuring. So if it's swine digestible energy, or whether it's oil, or whether it's protein, you want to span the range that you're interested in. Then we would go and take these samples and perform the reference analysis. So in our case, feed the pigs. Pigs or poultry. Well, I'll mention some poultry work that we have done as well. Then we would combine those reference results with our scans and train the instrument on how to predict from that. Once that model's built, then it's just a matter of validating with an independent set of samples, and then start predicting unknown samples. And then as we predict unknown samples, that's where we come up with our next population of samples that we need to add to the model to improve it. We update models when certain things change. For instance, we want to take this worldwide. Well, if we haven't shown the instrument samples, if all it's seen is samples from North America, number 2 corn, grown in the Midwest, well, by the time we go to another country, different growing environment, different germplasm, maybe it's flint type corn versus dent corn, that's going to look different. So we would start making expansions to the model, or updates to the model based on that. We want to expand the constituent concentration range. So when we had high oil, we started this work in the mid-90s, late 90s, we're in a high oil business. Now we have an analytical tool to measure that. But if our oil range was 2.5% to 4.5%, having 8.5% oil corn, though it would give us a value, you can't believe that it's necessarily the true value until you feed those samples to animals. So that's part of this constant updates. You want to avoid redundancy. That doesn't make the model better. Sometimes fewer is better. And then we need to fill this n-dimensional space. And what they mean by n-dimensional space, and this is a difficult slide to see, but what I'm trying to show here is that these little blue dots in here would be the current model. Those are the samples that are in the actual prediction model. And then the different colored dots or marks are from a source of samples. And as you can see, as they start to drift away from the blue dots, that would say that they're not predicting as well. It'll give you a number, but that's not necessarily a good number. Even the green dot up here, they look for the unknown sample to be close to a neighbor or one of the blue dots. So they look at that neighborhood sort of statistic. So that tells you how good it is. And when they're not very good, that's the time to say, okay, that set of samples needs to have reference chemistry or be fed to pigs. So that's part of what our folks do to build these models. So in this case, we're using the term HAE. That's a generic term we use around here, high available energy. We actually predict poultry nitrogen-corrected apparent metabolizable energy and swine digestible energy. To us, we don't care. for our own characterization purposes because they rank the hybrids the same. So we just use a generic term, high available energy. All of the samples we bring in from our plots, which for corn grain would be 30 to 40,000 a year, would be run through a whole grain analyzer, just like we have in the back of the room. Some statistics would be put on the data, and then we would rank them on a scale of 1 to 9 by our hybrid platforms. And so anything that's above a 5 or above average is considered high available energy. And then we would provide that information in like a sales catalog or a sales brochure so people buying seed could understand some hybrid platforms are different than others. And so this is just an example. We do this for 10 plus traits for corn. We do this for corn silage for another probably 10 traits. We do this for soybeans for half a dozen traits. And so we have a lot of different sample types that come through our lab. And in this case, for corn grain, one of the traits is high available energy. And so why is it important? Like I said before, back in the mid-90s, some of you are familiar with Tom Sauber and Dan Jones here, which are the swine nutritionists on staff. They had done some work with a couple universities to realize that if we were just to do gross energy on our samples, it wasn't enough to really understand the true differences in genetics. So they wanted to go to digestible energy or even metabolizable energy. So they recognized a strong genetic component. We built a facility up here north of town that I just mentioned to do that work in-house. And we really realized the strength and the method we developed to characterize this trait and started just turning the crank. Running lots and lots of samples through that pig model. Here's an example of 310 grain samples that were run through our swine model up there. And you can see the range in digestible energy, 1688 to 1910 kilocalories per pound on a dry matter basis, shows you the range that we saw, and then maybe even more importantly, the energy digestibility ranging from 84 to 92%. And that's really what we wanted to characterize. So rather than just do gross energy, we needed to get to digestible energy. When we actually did the metabolizable energy trials, we found that the sort of the work involved with including the urine energy was not worth the effort. It wasn't giving us anything in addition to what we had as far as characterizing our hybrids at digestible energy, so that's why we did settle on swine digestible energy. We found that pigs play with their waters a lot during the day, and you end up with a lot of water in your urine bucket, is essentially the case. So how was it originally developed? So we have 2 rooms up there, metabolism rooms, with 18 raised metabolism crates in each room. And we have an operator that's assigned to 1 room. We have grinding, mixing equipment. Of course, we can dry, prepare the samples. We have a feed mill up there. And then once we have feed and marker in place, these trials last 3 weeks. And it's usually, we start with about a 50-pound pig, and we'll have that pig through 3 one-week cycles. And then they're done. That's what we call 1 trial. We've done about 62 of those now. Once we have the feed, the marker, we've collected our sample, the fecal sample comes down to our lab where we'll make sure we get a dry matter, and we'll do bottom calorimetry on that diet and the fecal material. And at the time, we probably had an accuracy, let's say we could distinguish 15 to 20 kcals per pound on a dry matter basis. Well, you always want to improve, and the target was to cut that in half. And we had done some broiler AMEN and rooster TMEN work with the same samples, and decided we could do that with, we could cut that or improve the accuracy or squeeze error out of that model by going with the broiler model. And so we teamed up with AH Pharma, and they performed our broiler AMEN studies with a 21-day-old bird. They're raised right there on the site. They have these battery units that have an equal number of males and females in each cage, and we started turning the crank with the poultry AMEN model. We realized that we squeezed enough air out of it to get that down to somewhere around 10 kilocalories per pound or less, and so that improvement really excited us, and it incented us to write a paper, peer-reviewed paper that was just published in the Journal of Animal Science, showing that we can take this poultry AMEN data, convert it to swine DE, and then use that converted poultry AMEN or swine DE data as a base for our reference method. So now we have reference values that we can directly predict swine DE, but using data from our more accurate and precise poultry AMEN model. And so I thought I'd throw this up there. If you're interested, we'll get you a copy of the paper. But this describes the work we did to make sure that making that leap was possible. And then we also compared it to some published equations, some popular equations used to derive energy value. Some equations from Ewan and Noblet and Perez. A lot of information in that paper if you're interested. So now that we have, we were interested in doing this to characterize our germplasm. We know there is more power than just using it internally. We should, allow others to understand the energy value of corn as it's coming in real time, so you don't have to wait for lab results. Danisco has been providing a service to customers, and Janet can probably describe this better than I, but Milan, one of their tech service folks, shared some data with me from the 2014 crop, just to give you an idea of what they do. So their customers would send in grain samples from, let's say one of their feed mills or all of their feed mills, so many samples per month, and try to show or establish that there's a value here to understanding energy as you're feeding it versus a delayed response of getting results back and understanding, oh, that was the energy value that we had fed a week ago or 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, what happened. So in this case, there were 761 samples sent to a lab in Des Moines, Eurofins. That's who they're teamed up with. We have an instrument placed there. They run these samples through the NIR, and you'll see the green off, and I just decided to show you all three because we do predict all three energy values. We've got gross energy off to the far right. We've got in the red swine digestible energy, and then in the blue in the far left is the poultry AMEN values of those 761 samples. And I simply threw in there energy digestibility from that 2014 crop from these 761 samples was 90%, which showed that we had some good corn going through there. So in summary, mid-90s, Tom Sauber, Dan Jones were looking to understand differences of value to the livestock industry. In this case, it was for pigs and understanding energy differences in our germplasm. By 2003, we had this prediction model based on this high throughput NIR technology available and being used in the swine and poultry industry. We originally developed this using North American corn samples, but quickly realized that we needed to incorporate grain samples from around the world as interest grew. And the interest grew in that model becoming more accurate and precise. So we switched to the broiler model, started feeding all those samples, updated the model, and that's where we're at today. Very important that we maintain tight control of this process. So particle size is critical. And so we particle size every diet, make sure it falls within a certain range as far as the mean, but we also describe the distribution of particle size. We want to make sure that the animal feeding trial is done the same way every time. We don't want it done at multiple places, and that the material collection, it sounds easy doing a dry matter, but you would be amazed at how difficult it is just to do a dry matter in a repeatable sense. So having all this tight control of this entire process is critical because it's no better than the underlying reference chemistry. So I think that's it. Any questions?
That's a nice presentation. I'm just wondering if you could give me a sense for how the digestible energy of corn would vary as you take a good sampling of corn and measure it throughout the year in terms of digestible energy.
I don't know that I've seen any significant differences other than if quality were to decrease. So it depends on how well you are at managing that corn. So certainly mold will affect the spectrograph, you know, how that instrument sees it. So if you're good at maintaining good quality corn, I don't think you're going to have any issues. Broken, cracked, you know, foreign material affects it, and the more you handle it, or if it gets too dry, let's say, and you increase the number of broken cracks, that can affect it for sure. So you definitely need to manage, you know, high quality corn storage.
You said your 2014 corn crop's 90% digestible energy. Previous years you had like 84 to 92, so
that's the range that they've seen in these samples. Yes.
So arguably 2014's been one of the better years.
Looks like a pretty good corn crop.
Are you tracking that each year and have that information?
Yeah, that's going to be the goal. I don't have that right now, but certainly that is the goal, to do that and be able to characterize the, you know, differences in years.
Fill in your question a little bit, Bob. We really, this last year, are tracking large numbers of samples. Previously, we have tracked it, but with a smaller sample.
And since we at Pioneer do this annually, it would be, of course, specific to our germplasm. We only collect samples from our plots, but we would have something like that over years as well. But as far as commercial corn from Danisco customers, we're just kind of getting a good start on that. So.
The sample base that you talked about in your slides between 80 to 100, is that mostly in the upper Midwest, or is that across multiple states, southeast?
Well, you'd like it to be as diverse as possible. 80 to 100 is sort of a representative number of what we like to start with, just to see if the model's going to work. So that was more, we certainly have more than that in there now, but that's kind of where you start. That's a proof of concept. You pretty much need 80 to 100 to really get a good idea if you're going to be able to make this work.
You try to sample the same places year in and year out with the trend line?
Well, yeah, that's good to do, but it's more importantly, diverse set of samples. Diversity is what you're looking for. We don't really need a lot of the same samples because they wouldn't be included in the model anyway, because that adds redundancy and that actually makes the model a little worse. So as much diversity as we can find, the better. And growing location is important. So when you mention all around the U.S. or in the South, that's absolutely right. You need those types of samples. Same hybrid grown in different locations can be different.
Are you using this to help screen hybrids? Does it go that?
I'm sorry?
Are you using this to screen hybrids in terms of their development?
Well, we currently don't make a cut on, so we're not breeding for this trait. No.
Okay. It's just an evaluation.
Correct. So whatever comes out of our, you know, research pipeline, it gets commercialized. We just want to make sure we understand it, versus making a cut to research process because it's, you know, too low in energy. We wouldn't do that.
Still yield.
Yeah, it's not a breeding target by any means.
Still yield.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yield and agronomics are the key.
Yeah.
And then this is supplemental information to help a grower decide if, you know, if that's something they want to put some emphasis on.
And you do have other categories as well, like you got HA.
Yeah, we also characterize for extractable starch from a wet milling perspective. ethanol yield potential from dry mill ethanol production or fuel alcohol. Yeah, so we do a number of different traits for corn.
Have you been able to identify any biases in your NIR system?
That's a good question. I'm sure there are, and I'd need my NIR expert here to give you a detailed answer, but most of the biases they usually try to address up front and take care of that. But I'm sure there are, and unfortunately I'm not the best one to answer that. There are certainly biases, yes. There are a number of adjustments, and even not only in the equipment to make sure that it understands all these different types of corn samples it's seen, but just in the underlying data to make sure that it makes a good model. There are never seen some bias adjustments being made.
Thank you very much.